Welcome, welcome, welcome to Youth Sunday. Now, being Youth Sunday, I've had a couple of the kids make a request that the sermon be in the range of 5 to 7 minutes. I'm going to try to accommodate that as much as possible. Not well. I'm shooting for 20. Head shaking at me in disapproval, but I'm sorry, I can't quite get it all in 5. Although I will say this, in my Bible college days, my first and really most profoundly impactful preaching professor that I had, Dr. Doug Dickey, there was one thing he said that it was the most important rule about preaching, and it was and he meant it seriously, and that's, if it can't be said in under 20 minutes, it probably doesn't need to be said. And I've sat through enough 45-minute and 1-hour sermons that I really understand where he's coming from. So I'll do my best to honor, the late Doug Dickey. So we're going to be looking at John 15, the first 11 verses that Kim just read. And first of all, Jesus is talking there about he gives this parable about the vine and the branches, about fruitful living and unfruitful living. And one of the things we have to understand first of all is what is fruit. What is the fruit that he's talking about? It's on one hand it's simply an allegory of a life being of a productive life. But we have in the letter from Paul to the church, to the Galatian churches, we have a description of what this fruit is and what it's not. So if you want to turn to Galatians chapter 5. You can do that in the church Bibles. That's on page 808. Oh no, it's not. It's on page 810. Sorry. Galatians chapter 5, verses 9. First of all, the fruit of the Spirit that Paul talks about. The fruit of the Spirit being the evidence of an active relationship with Christ. If we have an active relationship with Christ, there will be certain things that the world can see in us as evidence of that relationship with Christ. And he lists 9 things. First of all, love. Then joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. For the purposes of honoring Doug Dickey's instruction about 20 minutes, I won't go into each one of those and just assume that we got a pretty good idea of what those things are. As Christians, we should be able to see these things in each other, and the world ideally will see these things in us in our interactions with each other and in our interactions with those who are not yet in a relationship with Christ. For these are the things that should draw people to Christ through us. He notes before this, though, in verse 19, the acts of the sinful nature, and he says that they're quite obvious to anybody who sees. The acts of the sinful nature. This is the opposite of the fruits of the Spirit. These are the things that people will see when we don't have an active, deep, true relationship with Christ. And he lists about a dozen things: sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft. And he starts out the list with the real heavy hitters, and most of the people most of the people reading this in the church, the people who purport to be followers of Christ, can get behind that. Oh, sure, I'm sexually pure for the most part. I'm impurity and debauchery. No, I'm glad to point those things out in other people. But then he starts listing things that are a little bit more relatable, at least openly: hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, which is just a fancy way of saying gets angry really easily. Selfish ambition, that's living for yourself before living for others. Dissensions, letting your arguments become abiding within you. Factions and envy, where we speak against each other rather than speaking to each other. Drunkenness and orgies. So these are all the things that Paul says are evidence in us that the world sees as evidence that we don't have the relationship with Christ that we purport to. And So he gives these two lists to help it clarify what it is as Christians we should be striving for, what we should be working towards, and what we should be working away from. And I think it's pretty fair to say that that as Christians, all of us, are not fully in one list or the other, but we've probably got feet in both camps there in some way or another. No matter how pure I try to be, I've got to I have to say, if I'm being completely honest, I've got issues with people that are that remain to be unresolved. I've got sometimes it's easier to talk about a problem than it is to actively deal with it. And these are stumbling blocks. These are troubles for all of us. And this is what Paul was talking about, and it's what Christ was talking about in his parable that he gave to his disciples. Looking at what he says, Christ talks about two specific things. It's an either-or thing. Either you are living, you're developing into unfruitful living, or you're developing into fruitful living. In John chapter 15, verse 3, he makes a very important point in this. It says, "You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you." It's not because of what you've done. It's not because of the work that you're doing. It's not because of anything other than the word I have spoken to you. Because you have heard the word, you are made clean. Now, it's not just to clarify here. Christ goes on to explain in here that it is through the word that we're made clean, but the evidence of our cleanness, of our relationship with him, is in our response. And we can respond by fruitful living, or we can respond by unfruitful living. If we are not living fruitfully, if we're not showing the evidence of the fruits of the Spirit that Paul points out, then there's going to be consequences to that. There are a couple of reasons that I think we can agree upon for finding ourselves in unfruitful living after having heard the word. And the first of all is simply refusing to listen to Christ, refusing his word. We all, and frankly everybody in our society, is exposed at one point or another to the word of Christ. It seems like more and more there are people we encounter who have been shielded from it in one way or another. That's our responsibility as followers of Christ to try to make sure that that's not happening. But pretty much everybody has the opportunity to hear it and respond to it. And there are some who simply will choose to not respond, will choose to turn away from it. So the first reason for unfruitful living is simply no response. The second is to listen and render lip service. Just to say, that sounds good to me. I'm with it. I'm a follower of Christ, and I'm late for my party. We as Christians, it must be about more than our words. It has to be more than just showing up at church occasionally on Sunday morning, and the Christmas and Easter services, and making sure that the Christmas cards we send out have a Bible verse on them. It's about actively responding. If we have an insincere response, we are guilty again of unfruitful living. Thirdly, people may accept him and then abandon him, to turn away. This half-hearted response is something that many of us, as active Christians, have been guilty of it at some time or another. When we let our doubts overcome our faith, when we become tired and choose no longer to seek an active relationship with Christ, when we decide to give in to sin and just kind of say, you know what, I don't have the energy for this. I'll pick back up on it next week. Or nobody's watching. I'm going to be good later. Right now, I'm going to do what I want to do. You know, the instance, the half-hearted response is, again, will not produce fruitful living. And the results of unfruitful living are pretty plain. Christ doesn't pull punches when he talks about consequences. This is a truth that we see all throughout the Gospels when Christ is talking about sin and what the results of sin are. He describes at first that branches that are not being fed by the vine, that are being unfruitful, will wither away. They will die. We're all familiar with the term, with the expression about dying on the vine. That's what this is. The result of unfruitful living is death. He goes on to be a little bit more specific, and he says that those vines those branches that wither away, that are not fruitful, will be cut off and will be thrown into the fire. For those of us who've been around who've been around farms and been around agriculture, which if you've grown up around here, you've seen at different times of the year. After a harvest or when parts of the crop are being culled, farmers will pile up the scrap and burn it. And this is part of the agricultural process that's been going on for thousands of years, and it's very intentional imagery that Christ uses here. This is in the Jewish tradition, one of the words to describe hell, or the eternal punishment, was the same word that was used to describe this flaming garbage pit that was outside of the city of Jerusalem. And it had been used for hundreds of years before Christ preached by the rabbis, that if you were found to be out of God's favor, you're going to spend your life and your afterlife living in this flaming pit. For them, it was a very real visual idea, much like it's a kind of a combination of a dump and a fire, and that's the idea that people had about hell, and that's the image that Christ is invoking here when he's speaking to his disciples, and it is quite intentional that he wants them to think about the consequences of unfruitful living. So, if not that, then what? If not unfruitful living, then fruitful living is what he's telling his disciples that he wants from them, what he wants from us. How do we have fruitful living? How do we know it's there? How do we cultivate that? How do we seek it out? First of all, it's to recognize that Christ is the source of our strength. The parable here, the imagery, is quite true. He is the vine, and we are the branches. The vine of the plant is like the trunk of the tree. It's where the leaves are fed from. It's where the branches are fed from. It's how the fruit on the branches are fed. All of the nutrients flow through the vine. All of the water flows through the vine. On a grapevine, there would be no plump, juicy, sweet grapes if not for the vine to feed to carry the water and the sugars to the blooms. And people are, and this made sense to the disciples who heard this, because they're very familiar with the idea of the growing plants, and also and this made sense as well about the idea that the unfruitful branches are trimmed away, are pruned back, and the notion being that the branches cannot survive apart from the vine once they've been cut off. And there's also an important notion here, though, is that pruning is not a bad thing for the plant. And as Christ is giving an idea about is talking about pruning in actually two different ways here in this passage. The first idea is that he talks about pruning for the health of the body, for the health of the collective body. For as the dead and dying are pruned away, growth happens in its place. The dead, dying branches that are just simply sucking life away and are doing nothing or being unfruitful, they're trimmed away, and the plant will grow and flourish with in the absence of the unfruitful branches. That sounds a little harsh on its face, but the fact of the matter is that that Christ is very clear about the consequences of unfruitful living. He's very clear about the consequences of sin, and that sin cannot exist in the presence of God. That is the purpose. That is the purpose of Christ's presence on this world, and his presence in our hearts and lives, is that he is there to overcome sin. And if we choose to hold on to sin and we choose to cultivate the sin, then we are going to be cut away. Now, he also talks. He continues to talk about pruning in a very positive way. Within us, we have times of pruning. And these are challenges that we face. Individually, we grow when we're challenged. We grow and we become stronger when we face difficult times. If we remember that Christ is the source of our strength. We're clipped, we're trimmed, we feel damaged, and we come out of it. If we are relying on Christ's strength, on his guidance, on his feeding, we come out of it stronger, more devoted, more faithful, more positive, because we've seen how we can be brought through. The results of fruitful living, just like the results of unfruitful living, are death, are the fire, are the ash pile. The results of fruitful living, first of all, is simply that we bear fruit. We become and we remain and we grow in our health spiritually. And what does that mean for us? Well, it means all of those things: the fruit of the Spirit, the love, the joy, the peace, the patience, the kindness, the goodness, the faithfulness, the gentleness, the self-control. These become hallmarks of who we are as people, individually and collectively as a body. That the world will see these things in us. Now, what that means for us individually is that we're able to just simply live better lives. We're able to be seen as Christ-like people, and the collective benefit of that individually for us is that all of the opposite things, the opposite of love, the opposite of joy, the opposite of peace, those things diminish in our lives. It's not to say that we don't still have problems. We certainly do. All of us who have lived, understand that no matter how much faith we have, no matter how much we rely on Christ and seek him for our strength, we will continue to be under attack. We will continue to face struggle. We will continue to be pruned back. But these things ultimately are for our benefit. Well, ultimately, we will grow through our struggles. Now, in the last few verses of the passage that Kim read for us today, chapter 15, verse 7, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be given you. Answered prayer is one of the results of living a fruitful life. Now, just to clarify here, because there's been it seems like in much of my adult life, there's been a lot of interesting discussion as different things pop up in various levels of popularity among modern Christian circles. Things like the prayer of Jabez, and if you want more details on that, please go talk to Dave later. I'm sure he'd love to talk with you about that. The idea that the whole health and wealth gospel thing. Again, Dave loves to talk about that stuff. That if you're faithful and if you're in God's favor, then all things will come to you. You won't have any more financial problems. You won't have any problems in your family. You won't get sick. Everything will be like heaven on earth, and won't it be wonderful? We're not promised that. And that's not what Jesus is talking about here. One of the notions here, and remember the whole, when Paul was talking about fruits of the Spirit versus the evidence of a sinful nature, one of the things Paul talked about in his list of evidence of the sinful nature is selfish ambition. If we're constantly praying for things to improve our, make our situation more comfortable, make our situation better, that's not really what Christ is talking about. Christ was talking about living for others. Paul was talking about putting others first, serving the needs of others. So when Christ is talking about having our prayers answered, he's talking about praying rightly. And when at other places in the Gospels, Christ gives examples of how to rightly pray. He gives examples about where our motivation should be, and like how Paul expounded on those examples, they're all pretty much follow the same general pattern. Pray for others. Pray for God's will to be done. Ask God not what He can do for you, but what you can do for Him. It sounds political, and those prayers will be answered. If you ask God what you can do for Him, He will tell you. And that's one of the benefits of fruitful living. In verses 9 through 11, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in His love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Love and joy are the results of fruitful living. If we live a life that bears fruit, that is clear evidence of a relationship with Christ, where we are making our world around us better and more Christ-like, we will be living in a condition of love and joy. This is Christ's promise to us. This is what He wants for us. This is the result of living a life that is full of the evidence of the fruit of the Spirit. And finally, and go back another verse to verse 8. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. It's not for our own glory. It's not so that we can lift each other up or hold ourselves up and puff out our chest and say, look how godly I am. It is not so that we can have the spotlight on us, but so that the world can see Christ in us. That the world can hear the encouraging words of Christ in our conversations with each other. That the hurting can see the healing love of Christ in the way that we help each other, in the way that we reach out, in the way that we accept help. There's a quote, and I wish I could remember who said it, but I'm sure somebody out there can. And if you know who it is, make sure Dave knows later so you can go to him. The best evidence against Christianity are the people. Are Christians. The best evidence for Christianity are also the Christians. The world sees our failings in that list of things that Paul listed of the evidence of the sinful nature. Our failings, our sin, are out there for everybody to see. But the world too sees God's glory in us when we are living fruitful lives. The world sees God. The world sees Christ in the way that we serve each other, in the way that we lift each other up, in the way that we worship God through our actions, our words, our prayers, our motivations. And we need to be cognizant of this, and that needs to be our ultimate goal. Fruitful living is not something that we seek for because it's going to make us feel good. Fruitful living is what we hope for so that we can be beacons of Christ's love in this world. Now, ultimately, if we need to recognize one important fact as well, and that is that all of this is for naught, but for one simple fact. This is not something that a man came up with, this notion of living lives to serve other people. It's not simply a good idea. It's not something that we can just pick up the ideas and run with them and make it work. There's power behind this. And that power was best evidenced through the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. We can't overcome sin by being less sinful. We can't undo the evils that we've done in our lives by trying to be really good. It's not through our own efforts. It's not by trying to look fruitful that the true fruits of the Spirit are evidenced in us. That is folly. That is a waste of time to try to just simply be more loving. I'll try to be more joyful and everything will fall into place. I'll do good things for people and, people will see me acting like Jesus and that'll be good enough. That doesn't cut it. It won't work. You won't have the energy to keep that up. You will fail. I will fail. I have failed at that. The only way that we can, that this works is by recognizing and responding to the sacrifice that God made for us through the death of His Son, through His sure and unquestionable death to life here, and through His submission to death, through His death and burial, and through ultimately His overpowering of death and sin through His resurrection. All for us, for us individually as believers, for us corporately as His body. It is through Him that all of these things are possible and all of these things are made real. So as we go out from here today, and we think about the notion of the fruits of the Spirit and being and living lives that produce this fruit, and avoiding the things that are evidence that we don't have it, we need to remember that it's not about our efforts. It all starts with and abides in Christ's sacrifice for us. That when we do serve each other, we serve each other not because we want to be nice, not because we want to be kind, but because we have been served the greatest gift already. We don't give because we have excess to give, or even that we find the ability to give when we don't have excess, but we give because we have been given the greatest gift, and we share that out of the excessive joy of our heart. Seek to honor that great gift that we've been given. Respond appropriately, rightly, the way that God wants us to respond to His gift of Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, and live and go out from here living fruitful lives. So let's go ahead and pray together today and move on. Lord, I thank You so much for Your great gift. Just pray that we would live lives of gratitude, and that the fruit of the Spirit would be wholly evidenced in our interactions with each other, in our words, in our deeds, in our motivations. I just pray, Lord, that all of these things You want to see in us would be in us. And that they wouldn't be there simply because we do a good job of making it look like it, but they would be there because we have real, true, deep, abiding relationships with You. I pray, Lord, for those of us who don't know that, whether it's because we've never known it or because we've struggled and we've fallen away. I just pray that you would, that your Spirit would touch those of us who need you. That we would respond appropriately and rightly to your calling. Lord, I thank you so much that you do seek us out. Thank you so much that you give us the ability to live, and live rightly, and live good, fruitful lives. Thank you for feeding us the way a vine feeds its branches. Thank you for the challenges that you give us. Thank you for helping us and guiding us become the people that you want us to be. And I just pray that our actions, our responses to you would honor you, Lord. As we go out from here, as we interact with each other as a body, and as we as a body and individually within that body respond to our neighbors, our lost family members, our co-workers. Just pray that we would honor you by showing you to the world around us. It's in your name that we gather together today, and in your name that we go out from here today, Lord, into the world. Amen.